Hey guys, Zane here with another one-take review, and today I want to talk about the new Arcade Fire album, We. We is the sixth and latest full-length studio album from Canadian rock band Arcade Fire, who are now coming off of 5 years after their much maligned album Everything Now, which, it disappointed critics and fans alike as far as I'm concerned, and even though it has been more than just a minute since they released Everything Now and disappointed the vast majority of their fan base and their critics, I think there was still a looming sense of wariness in the back of everyone's heads when We was announced if it would be as bad as Everything Now, or perhaps be even worse. It's not nearly as bad as Everything Now, and it's certainly not worse than that album, which was an absolute train wreck, but it's not great either. More importantly, however, is that We is set to be the last Arcade Fire album to feature member Win Butler. Win Butler has been with Arcade Fire since their early EP, as well as their first full-length LP, Funeral, of course, which is kind of a modern classic at this point. And generally speaking, even though Arcade Fire are undoubtedly a collective effort, Win Butler has kind of felt like the driving force of the group throughout the many years that they've been together now. While there's no guarantees of what direction the band will go in after Win Butler leaves, as again, he did feel like a major driving force for their creative directions, it does feel like there's the potential that they may not be the same without Win Butler. I'm not saying anything's for sure, but it really does feel like he was a very essential member of the group for the longest time, and unfortunately, We just does not act as a proper send-off for him. Rather, it feels like Win just kind of fizzling himself out of the band more than anything. His vocals are fine, his presence is fine, his everything is fine, but there's nothing really noteworthy that he does here, which is especially strange coming from the man who has genuinely carried Arcade Fire on the aforementioned Funeral as well as records like The Suburbs. The way that he half-heartedly delivers lyrics is just ensuring that there's no quotable lines on We as an entire album. His multi-instrumentation feels less important and essential than it ever has before. It's truly just a disappointing performance on what's an otherwise enjoyable record, and while I'm not expecting a grand, sweeping symphony to, play off Win Butler as he's carried away by a chariot that is led by angels made of gold, I'm kind of just disappointed that he doesn't do anything all that noteworthy here. He's been with the band since their inception, and it's just a shame that he's leaving with just this kind of blip of a record. Ignoring Win Butler's frustrating lack of enthusiasm, We is actually still a very well-composed album, albeit with some moments of over-the-top melodramatics. Arcade Fire pull out most of the stops here to instill some sort of emotion within We, but they get so caught up in their own fervency that they forget to actually add to the overall essential music of the actual record. There's no meat here, basically. It lacks substance. It rarely feels like the very melodramatic vibe and gut-wrenching atmosphere has any reason to even be there, and We as an album is obviously very emotional to some extent, or at least it should be. On one hand, it's named after a Russian book of dystopian science fiction literature, and it's a goodbye letter from one of the most noteworthy individuals within modern indie rock music, but unfortunately there's just really not a lot of substance here to actually enjoy, to really develop those emotions beyond the fact that they're simply just presented to you and the band's just saying, hey, feel these emotions. Rather than just naturally perform and create an emotional atmosphere on their own with the topics that they are providing with the record, they just try and slap you in the face with sentimentality and a variety of other emotions that are supposed to make you misty-eyed and everything like that, and unfortunately, it really just doesn't work. It doesn't ruin the album by any means, but it just doesn't work in the way that Arcade Fire want it to. There really isn't a lot to say about We's instrumentals. A lot of songs here embrace more orchestral compositions, or at least similarly composed songs, even if they're not necessarily orchestral, that embrace an older sound for Arcade Fire, definitely a more Arcade Fire sounding than the synth-poppy kind of sounds that were found on Everything Now. That being said, a handful of tracks here embrace a more dance-based electronic sound, but these songs manage to handle these influences, these sounds, with a lot more maturity and self-confidence than their previous record ever did. If We proves anything as an album for Arcade Fire as a band, it's not that they're unable to experiment with realms that go beyond indie rock, it's just the fact that they did it really terribly on Everything Now. Neither side of the record really does anything particularly mind-blowing, but then again, Arcade Fire, in my opinion, haven't really done anything particularly mind-blowing since The Suburbs in 2010, and depending on who you ask, they've never done anything mind-blowing, so take that for what you will. The best that Arcade Fire at this point can do is just take previous failures, previous failed influences that they've tried to incorporate before, and improve on them as much as they can, and I mean, that's certainly something that they do on Wii. Lastly, don't let Wii's tracklist fool you. This is not 10 songs, this is one normal-length song, the title track that closes off the album, one interlude, and 4 different songs that are split up into multi-part suites that are considered different tracks for no apparent reason. This may feel minuscule at best in the grand scheme of things, but it is something that feels undeniably unnecessary, especially in the age of streaming and digital listening, as advertisements in between songs can especially make things feel awkward and disjointed. And while I do like Arcade Fire, I don't like Arcade Fire enough to buy Spotify Premium so that I can listen to what the true piece was supposed to sound like in full. I don't care that much, to be honest. Putting together all of these broken up songs and just making them individual for just longer songs would have been fine. Arcade Fire are no strangers to longer tracks. They've done 6, 7, 8-minute long songs before. They just choose not to here for some reason, and it feels just, again, disjointed and, frankly, idiotic. Overall, Wii doesn't break down any barriers or do anything particularly interesting or different, or really anything that's worthy of being a send-off letter for Win Butler that a lot of people, including myself, were hoping for. That being said, it molds a lot of ideas from everything now, along with a little bit of the older ideas from the first few albums, and puts them together for something that's consistently good but never great. I digress. Even with its flaws and snags along the way, Wii is still a nice return to form for a band that were once one of the most exciting outfits on the planet, not only of rock music, but just in general, and it was truly a shame to see them fall off as hard as they did on everything now, but it's at least nice to sort of have them back, even if Win Butler is now leaving them. So I'm going to give Wii 3.5 stars out of 5. Definitely not even in my top 3 Arcade Fire albums, not even close. In fact, if Everything Now didn't exist in all of its god-awfulness, this would be the weakest Arcade Fire album. But still, it's a consistent listen, and if anything, that stands to testament that if you remove Everything Now from the Arcade Fire discography, how consistent it is, really. But anyways, 3.5 stars out of 5, and with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.